Good morning, everyone. This is Jeffy Kennedy, author of fantasy romance and romantic fantasy. I'm here with my first cup of coffee. That's really good this morning. Today is Thursday, October 28th, and headed to Writer Coffee this morning. Lots of things on my mind having to do with women and taking credit for our accomplishments. And I'm trying to figure out how I can talk about this in a way without spilling tea, as it were. Seems like there are people worried lately about me spilling tea on this podcast. And it's like, I want to share with you guys real information about the industry, right? About being a career author. But it turns out that there are people who don't want me to talk about those things. Uh, a while back, in like January, I spoke about I think just I can't even remember what exactly my theme was, but I was talking about behaving yourself in groups in general, and I gave a specific um, example of somebody who had run afoul of a group. However, I did not identify any of the people involved. I just talked about the situation and said, "Don't do this kind of thing." And just recently, I found out that somebody sent that podcast to someone in the group, and I think they were like trying to I don't know, get me in trouble, or maybe someone was just from the group saw it and thought it was funny. But it's like from back in January, and the group saw it and they thought it was really funny. So they're like, we don't know where she got the inside baseball. And the person who told me, who's in that group, fessed up, and they're like, oh, okay. This is how grown-ups handle these things, you guys. It's not that big of a deal. I have had somebody say, that if I talk about real stuff at all, that people out there will try to figure out who it is and that they will track it down. And it's like, I don't know. That's just I, I just don't. I just don't think that's true. And also, I think it would be really hard to figure it out. People say, "Oh, people can figure it out," and it's like, really? It's like I talk to so many different writers in so many different genres, and I file off the serial numbers when I talk about things. I don't think so. And besides, I think that implies a certain level of, um, I'm not going to say narcissism, because I feel like that's a term that's getting watered down because we're throwing it around too much, but self involvement, solipsism, that you think that if you think that people are really going to spend that much time trying to figure out stuff about you, um, maybe people will, but I think it's unlikely. So anyway, um, in this particular case, I know of a female author who was one of my greatest influences, and I her love her books. Her books are just I don't luminous, and I'm having trouble filing off the serial numbers here. At any rate, I don't think that I heard that she refused an award, and it kind of breaks my heart that she refused it. And one of the things she said was that they could find someone more worthy. And I'm not going to put this down entirely to femaleness, although she is older than I am. Um, really, my mother's generation, not quite, but in that neighborhood. And I don't know. I've seen so much evidence over time, and maybe the younger women are a lot better than my generation. But a lot of, I don't know, I think women have been so conditioned to not take credit for themselves. Um, I remember being at a conference many, many moons ago. When was this? Early 90s, early mid 90s. And it was for Association for Women in Science. And there were all of these women getting up and giving different talks about their career paths and so forth. And after like I don't know, I think it might have been just like the first morning, one gal got up there and she may have been one of the organizers, or I think she may have just been an attendee. But she got up there and she said, okay, has anyone noticed that every single person so far has accompanied the story of their career path with some sort of mitigating phrase? And it was funny because it was the same phrase every single time. um, by a stroke of luck, by chance, I got lucky. And you guys know I'm always talking about acknowledging the role of serendipity in our lives. Well, this was like going way too far in the other direction. And she made a really good point. She said, every woman who has spoken so far has attributed her career success to something other than her own hard work and intelligence. And and as soon as she pointed it out, it was really striking. And so she said, okay, so I am proposing that for the rest of the conference, we do not use these phrases. And then it was so funny because people would get up there and be giving their talks and they would start to use the phrase and everybody would go, no. And it was an illuminating experience. It was fascinating to hear people have to readjust and not attribute things to luck. And they were supposed to use the phrase instead, something like, through my hard work and diligence, through my persistence. um, and it was hard for them to say that instead. So I don't know, I think, we talk a lot about imposter syndrome, and I've certainly been feeling some imposter syndrome last week, because now that I'm president of Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, SIFWA, I am now in really August company with, and I'm getting, you guys, I got an email from Greg Bear. I mean, Greg Bear emailed me, and I was like, I had a little fangirl moment, and I was like, wow. And it's easy to feel that imposter syndrome because I was like, wow, what if I say something stupid to Greg Bear? So, and why am I in this company with all these other people, and do I deserve to be, right, through some stroke of chance? And I think I tend to, so here's my excusing myself, my imposter syndrome is that I put it down to that I was elected president because I'm really well organized. Organization is my superpower. And because I'm really well organized and I'm a good administrator. Um, and other people have pointed out to me uh, that that's not the only reason I was elected. And it's like, oh. um, but isn't that funny how we do that to ourselves? How we talk ourselves out of, oh, I'm not that, I wasn't elected because I'm a wonderful fantasy writer. It's because I'm actually just a good administrative assistant. And I don't know. It's a funny thing. And so I think when people offer to celebrate our accomplishments, and we put them off and say, well, find someone more worthy. Um, what is that saying? I mean, in some ways you're kind of kicking them in the teeth by saying, like, I don't think you know what you're talking about. I don't trust your judgment. I mean, is that what we're saying? So anyway, that's I know, vague. I can't be more specific than that. But it's interesting when you talk about various authors, and you guys can see some of my books behind me, like, especially female authors, who write romance crossover. that they are not treated seriously. And I was having a conversation with a writer friend of mine yesterday who was very excited that she gets to meet an author on her travels soon. And I said, I don't think I've heard of that author. And she said, oh, well, she's huge. She's huge. She's, you know, as big as this other author. And I was like, I don't think I've heard of that other author too. I mean, it's really odd. And she said, oh, well, they're in, there's only room for so many people in literary anointed SFF, and those two are it. And I was like, oh, I guess I don't know a lot about literary anointed SFF then. And I looked them both up, and part of it is because they both write short stories, and I just don't read short stories. It's every once in a while, but I don't enjoy reading short stories. I want a novel. I want something that'll last a long time, and a short story just almost always leaves me feeling kind of unsatisfied. But I've been bringing this up a lot lately, and it's striking to me that there are so many different circles of readership, where people attain celebrity within a certain pond. And and I messaged to Grace, because we message most days, and I said, okay, no Googling, have you heard of this author or this author? And she was like, no. It was like, I felt better that she hadn't heard of them either. And I did the same thing to Dorinda, and she didn't know. So it's like, all right, well, they're just not in our particular readership. And I explained to Grace who they were, and she said, well, big fish, very small pond. And I think that's really true. Um, it's interesting to see where the fangirling happens, and like which circles. Um, and who looms large in whose lives. And I think I'm not sure what the takeaway is exactly, except that we all tend to inhabit certain ponds, right? We inhabit our filter bubbles, and we know the fish in our pond, but then we forget that there's other ponds out there. Maybe that's part of it. Um, yeah. So for all of my brave talk about how I want to share industry stuff with you guys, there's some stuff here I can't share with you, and I wish that I could. But it's interesting, especially when I bring up names of certain female fantasy authors, to hear a man come back with something like, um, male fantasy author is far superior. And I'm not going to get in an argument about why, but it's like, well, what makes male fantasy authors far superior? Why do you pick that person? Um, and I think, if we dug into it, it would be, oh, well, what female fantasy author, who has not won probably a lot of the big awards, which tend to go to certain types of writing, that what she's not writing the good stuff, right? It's interesting. Back to my question of what is good. How do we decide what is good? How do we decide what is art and what is not? How do we decide what is commercial? Um, if something sells well and is popular, does that mean that it is automatically not art? I mean, there are some people who will go with that definition, that it's only art if nobody buys it. Maybe until you trip over to this other end where you're like high end art, and then everybody buys it. But I've heard people say things like that about Georgia O'Keeffe, who was getting $1 million a painting by the time she, in her later life, and people are like, oh, well, she was okay, but she wasn't a true artist, or she was kind of a hack, and she was just really commercially successful. Um, it's a funny thing. I always come back to, all the monkeys pointing at each other and flinging poo and trying to decide who's the best monkey. So, worked on the novella yesterday. It's coming along pretty well. I think I've passed like 11,000 words, so that's exciting. Shooting for 25 to 26. I'm going to have to do a bit of revising on it because I did, as I've mentioned, sort of work my way in on those first couple chapters. But the way the story is shaping, I may be keeping more of those initial chapters than I thought. The lesson there, as always, being uh, that I intuitively know what I'm doing as a writer more often than I consciously think I do. Uh, that probably ties into some sort of imposter syndrome too, right? Uh, what it would be great if I could learn to trust myself, but I also believe that the angsting, that the worrying about it is part of the process, and it is through that we bring out that creativity and invest it with energy. So I'm going to scurry off so I'm not late. Uh, but I'll remind you all that First Cup of Coffee is part of the Frolic Media Podcast Network, and you will find more podcasts you love at frolic.media/podcasts. And I will talk to you all tomorrow. You all take care. Bye bye.